Chapter 731, Gaines Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios' illusory black threads emanated out of Señor's body and entered Klein's hands. With every jolt in spirituality, it gave a different reaction. In fact, there was no need to use both hands when controlling the spirit-body threads. Klein was just accustomed to doing so, as it gave him a feeling like he was truly controlling a puppet. From the looks of it, other marionettists can discover each other's marionettes. The Señor's abnormality can't be hidden from their eyes, so I have to be careful about this. Klein concluded the problems he discovered, and he quickly turned his thoughts back onto Señor. This Admiral of Blood was dead. His spirit body had become a vessel for the marionette, losing any traits that belonged to him. Therefore, many divination methods were ineffective against him. Of course, methods to seek his corpse were still effective. Klein planned on cleansing the wraith in the gray fog before using paper angels to envelop the mirror-like objects that he had possessed before placing him into a cigar case that was sealed by a wall of spirituality, along with Azek's copper whistle. This created a three-layered interference effect. This way, Klein believed that, even if the Rose School of Thought Angel wished to, it was impossible to use divination to lock onto his position via Admiral of Blood. As for whether the Mother Tree of Desire had left any backdoors in Señor's body, he wasn't too worried. This was because if that really happened, she could have mutated Señor during the demigod battle royale in order to deal with him. Based on the situation back then, there was a guaranteed chance of success. Mother Tree of Desire, or should I say, the Chained God, strictly controls its organization's members. It relies on a vow contract and other methods that are ingrained into the soul. This can be inferred from Miss Sharon's descriptions and my interaction with the corresponding characteristics. As long as I don't attempt to use Admiral of Blood to divine the secrets of the Rose School of Thought or the potion formula of the mutant pathway, I wouldn't trigger any problems. The werewolf beyonder characteristic has remained normal despite being above the gray fog for so long. Besides, there's still the gray fog cleansing process. If there are any latent problems, it should be washed out. Klein thought for a while and took out Azek's copper whistle from inside his body. He turned his right wrist and made the side with fewer patterns appear under the sunlight, making it reflect the light. Immediately, the copper whistle had Señor's figure appear on it as it rapidly turned clear. The Admiral of Blood in front of Klein suddenly vanished as a result. Perhaps the Mother Tree of Desire can use the vow contract and other methods to vaguely lock on, but that doesn't matter. She can sense the gray fog's unique trait on me anyway, and she will sense me once I'm within range. Besides, this marionette might be destroyed at any time when I use it as a shield. Klein was like a jobless tramp who was debt-laden. He felt that there was almost nothing he was afraid of. Of course, he really was debt-ridden. As long as I advance to a demigod and can hide my unique trait, it's fine losing marionettes. Klein surveyed the area as he bent his back to pick up the silver necklace. He took 4 steps counterclockwise while chanting the incantation softly. This time, he hadn't entered via summoning his spirit body, so he couldn't directly return. The grayish-white fog was quickly emanated as hysterical ravings and roars echoed for an eternity. Azek's copper whistle didn't react abnormally, which meant that there weren't any latent problems with Admiral of Blood. Sitting at the end of the bronze table, Klein placed Azek's copper whistle in front of him, making Señor, who was dressed in a dark red coat and old triangular hat, appear. He was like a butler awaiting orders from his master. "Do you have any other items on you?" Klein asked, as though Admiral of Blood was still alive. This was his attempt to act as a marionettist. Following that, he controlled Señor, made him rummage through every pocket as he subsequently took out £325, 16 soldi, and 8 pence in cash. There were also 13 gold coins. Apart from that, perhaps due to his frequent act of transforming into a wraith state, Señor didn't carry anything else on him. How poor. As a pirate admiral, you don't even have a single mystical item? Did you hand it over to the Rose School of Thought or your subordinates? Klein seriously considered cashing out Admiral of Blood via the black market. Just in loan alone, he was worth £42,000. Yes, claiming the bounty from loan isn't pragmatic. Be it the Church of Storms and the Kingdom's military, they will follow the clues to capture Gehrman Sparrow, who managed to embroil so many demigods in a battle royale, and then investigate the organization backing him. They wouldn't even pay, and they might even plant a trap. By the same logic, the churches and governments of other countries must have similar ideas. However, they might be easier to work with. Retrieving the bounty will require substantial risks. Besides, there's no rush. I'll send Senor out when I plan on switching marionettes. After all, being a marionette for a few days won't change his identity or value. Klein reined in his thoughts and cast his gaze on the silver necklace with an ancient coin attached to it. He immediately used divination to gain the gist of its origins and usage. It came from a Sequence 5 winner from the Life School of Thought. After dying at the hands of a Rose School of Thought demigod, this gentleman's beyonder characteristic and psyche fused with an ordinary silver necklace that he carried with him, turning into a mystical item. As for the reason why the ordinary silver necklace would be carried by a Sequence 5 powerhouse for extended periods of time, Klein was unable to receive any effective revelations from it, as it had been too long and it had been corrupted. The mystical item had two uses. One was to passively make the wearer lucky. In their daily lifestyle, the owner would encounter good things, easily succeeding in whatever they did. When suffering a lethal blow or terrifying disaster, ridiculous scenes would happen, allowing them to be successfully rescued. The latter situation only lasted for 10 minutes. The second use was to actively give an enemy bad luck, making the target unlucky. Be it in daily life or combat, it was easy for them to experience failure due to some trivial problem. The corresponding negative effects of the necklace was the conservation of luck. After being lucky, they would immediately meet with repeated bad luck. They would be as unlucky as they were lucky before. It needed the wearer to be devoted and seriously avoid any danger, otherwise, it was very easy for them to die in a comedic manner, and even harm people around them. The luck received in one's daily life would often revert back after a month. The user would end up unlucky regardless of whether they wore it or not. However, such bad luck was slowly released, so it wasn't too dangerous. And luck obtained in combat would similarly strike back 10 minutes later in a similar vigor. Overall, this is a rather good mystical item, but I don't have much use for it. After all, Fate Counselor Ricardo was unable to change my luck. I'll just wear it on me for now. It has few negative effects on me. I'll sell it if there's a chance to pay off my debt with Miss Messenger. Miss Messenger wants gold coins, while I have gold pounds. It's nearly impossible to exchange 10,000 gold coins through the banks or official markets. From the looks of it, I'll have to do it in batches, getting each Tarot Club member to change some of it. Klein soon decided on a plan as he casually came up with a name for the necklace, Scales of Luck. Following that, he cast his gaze onto Senor, who was standing reverently to his side. He began to study the powers a wraith had. Forceful possession, enemy control, wraith's shriek, mirror blink, obstacle penetration, death-related spells, and invisibility that wouldn't be discovered by most mid- and low-sequence beyonders. Klein distinguished each power, and he matched them with Sharon's and Merrick's description, as well as his experience gained from combat. He soon concluded this, afraid that the candle in the outside world would finish burning. And a dark cave was extremely bad for the present him who had a phobia of the dark. Klein immediately took out a paper figurine from the junk pile, and together with the Black Emperor card, he stirred some of the powers above the grey fog, turning it into an anti-divination angel. This angel rapidly spread its wings and wrapped around a gold coin. On its reflective side was Senor's figure. Then, Klein brought the gold coin, Azek's copper whistle, death knell, and his suitcase back to the real world. As for Creeping Hunger and Grozel's travels, one of them hadn't been fed, and the other might cause Klein to be swallowed into the book for carrying it for too long. Therefore, they were left in the junk pile above the gray fog. Having returned to the cave, Klein hurriedly placed the gold coin and Azek's copper whistle into a cigar case before sealing it with a wall of spirituality. He cleaned up the scene, switched into formal clothes, and carried his suitcase. He followed the beach until he came to a residential area. He discovered that he was near Pritz Harbor. He didn't immediately return to Backlund. Instead, he changed his appearance, took a steam locomotive, and headed for Conant City in Desi Bay. He planned on circling the area once before changing his identity again. Bansi Harbor. Alger Wilson looked at the destroyed city under the afternoon sun. He saw that the buildings had completely collapsed, and there were deep chasms in the ground and charred spots everywhere. Such a scene extended into the depths of the island. Even the mountain had collapsed. At that moment, there wasn't anyone from the Church of Storms watching the ruins, since there wasn't anything here. And the plans to rebuild the harbor wasn't brought forward at all. Alger jumped off the Blue Avenger and circled the ruins with his sailors, but they didn't discover anything of value. "Let's go," he instructed with a staid attitude. He soon boarded the ship which hoisted its sails and left the island. After an unknown period of time, a figure suddenly walked out from the depths of the ruins. He wore a double-breasted, pure black clerical robe. He had dark golden hair, and his facial features were clear and distinct, like an ancient, classical sculpture. His eyes were dark blue, nearing black. They looked lusterless, but they were filled with dense blood capillaries. Chapter 732, Destination Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Desi County, Conant City, 67, Red Indus Street. Wearing a commonly seen face in the Lone Kingdom, Klein took a step forward and rang the doorbell. In less than a minute, the door creaked open as a maidservant looked out and asked out of curiosity, "Good evening, who might you be looking for?" "I'm here to find Ma'am Nilu." "I'm a friend of her father, Davy Raymond," Klein answered calmly. Derek Raymond was the nightmare who he had released from creeping hunger. It was a red glove from the Nighthawks, and the first thing on his mind before he dissipated was his daughter, Nilu Raymond. He was very apologetic towards her for not spending time with her while she grew up, making her effectively lose her father when she had already lost her mother. Klein had promised him that he would make a visit to the beautiful coastal city if he had the chance to visit his daughter. Having probed for more information earlier, Klein had gained a general idea about Nilu Raymond's situation. After this girl graduated from grammar school, she worked at the Women and Children Care Foundation, which was run by the Church of the Evernight Goddess. She had a weekly salary of £2.10 solely and was the target of envy by her neighbors. She also inherited an inheritance from her businessman father. As for how much it was, no one knew. They just knew that she was richer than most people from the middle class. Typically speaking, women with such wealth would place great emphasis on their marriage. They would repeatedly select and observe candidates, resulting in their late marriage. However, Nilu had married to a civil servant just a year later. As both parties were believers of the Evernight Goddess, she didn't take on her husband's last name. She continued going by the name Nilu Raymond, and she continued staying at 67, Red Indus Street. After hearing Klein's answer, the maidservant quickly requested him to wait as she entered the living room to report to her mistress. Before long, a woman in a home dress walked to the door. She had black hair and blue eyes. Her face was rather thin, and she was rather pretty. She resembled Davy Raymond. "Good evening, sir. I'm Nilu, Davy Raymond's daughter. May I know when you got to know my father?" Nilu Raymond asked politely but warily. Klein took off his hat and smiled. "I got to know him at sea. It's been several years." Nilu Raymond swept him with a wary gaze and said, "Perhaps you might not know, but he has already passed away." Klein sighed and replied, "Yes, I know. I got to know him through that disaster. He had some words to say back then which I didn't think too much about. However, the more I thought about it in recent years, the more I felt that I should inform you." "Is that so?" Nilu said softly. After some thought, she invited him. "Please come in. Would you mind if my husband listens in?" "This is up to you to decide," Klein frankly replied. Neela nodded and led Klein into the study. Her husband had the looks of an ordinary civil servant with a gentleman's bearing. He put down his newspapers and followed them in. After both parties sat down, Klein looked at the couple on the sofa and deliberated. Mr. Davy Raymond once experienced disaster after another. He lost his father, mother, wife, brothers, and sisters. Neela nodded with a deadpan expression. "I know." Klein thought and continued, "He appears to be a merchant, but he was in fact seeking out the murderers who caused that disaster." "I know." Neela didn't object to it. Klein glanced at her and continued, "He dedicated himself to this matter, and he was very regretful that he didn't manage to spend time with you growing up, making you lose your father alongside your mother." Neela fell silent for a second before she rapidly replied, "I know." Klein swept his gaze to the old books around him and sighed silently. "He said that his greatest wish was to see you enter the hall of marriage under the witness of the goddess, to have your own family, and to not be lonely anymore. I believe he should be very happy right now." Neela's gaze slowly moved away from Klein's face as she turned Agape, answering only 2 seconds later. "I know." Klein leaned forward slightly as he clasped his hands. "He said that he might die at sea, and he wanted me to tell you that he died as a result of an accident. All the murderers from before have already been punished. You do not need to hate anyone. He also said that he loves you very much and that he's very sorry." Neela remained silent for a few seconds as she blinked. She turned her head to the side and scoffed with an unclear attitude. "Got it," Klein gave her a deep look before getting up. "I'm done passing on the message. It's time I leave." Met with silence, Neela's husband nodded gently as a gesture of thanks. Klein turned around, walked to the door of the study. Just as he twisted the doorknob, Neela Raymond's voice sounded from behind him, deep and hoarse. "What kind of person do you think he was?" Klein fell silent for a second, turned his head, and curled his lips. He said with a smile, "A guardian." He didn't stay any longer as he opened the door and walked to the coat rack. When he wore his hat and left 67, Red Indus Street, soft, restrained sobbing suddenly drilled into his ears. Shaking his head silently, Klein left the borough and entered a cathedral of the Evernight goddess. Passing through the dark and serene aisle, he sat in the 7th row from the back. He faced the crimson half-moon and the black sacred emblem filled with resplendent stars. He took off his hat, lowered his head, and held his hands to his mouth, just like the many believers present. While praying silently in the silence and tranquility, time quickly passed. Klein slowly opened his eyes as he gently stood up. At the spot where he sat, he left behind an item wrapped in paper. Klein walked along the aisle and left the prayer hall, going straight to the cathedral's entrance. With his back facing the hall, he wore his hat, raised his right hand, and snapped his fingers. "Pa!" The paper suddenly ignited where he sat, garnering the priest's attention. When this gentleman rushed over, the flames had already extinguished, leaving behind a dark gem-like item. "This is..." Although the priest didn't know what the item was, his spiritual perception told him that it was very important. When he and the other priests rushed outside the cathedral, the gentleman in a tailcoat and half-top hat had already disappeared. The next morning, through a local black market, Klein had obtained a new identity as he came to the steam locomotive station. In his hand was a second-class ticket worth 18 soldi, as well as identification documents for himself. He held a black leather suitcase as he stood at the platform with his back straight, awaiting the arrival of the train headed for Backland. The present him was a middle-aged man who was nearing his 40s. He was slightly more than 180 centimeters tall, and his black hair had a few silver strands. His deep blue eyes were like a lake at night, and he was rather good-looking. He gave off mature and elegant vibes. Looking down at the identification documents, Klein's eyes reflected his present name, Dwayne Dantes. After some thought, he placed the suitcase on the ground, laid it down, and opened it before stuffing all his identification documents inside. Inside the suitcase, there was a black wooden box containing the former lone soldier, Frunzier Edward's ashes. Moments after arranging his suitcase, he heard a whistle. A steam train chugged into the station spewing smoke before it slowed down to a halt. He looked up and cast his gaze forward as he examined it in silence. Then, he looked down at his suitcase and whispered, "It's time to return." He then stood straight, carried his belongings, and walked to the open carriage door. Backlund, Sherwood Backlund, 26, Gunstead Street. Benson took off his hat, removed his coat, and handed it to the maidservant. He looked at his sister, Melissa, who was glued to her book in the living room. "The entrance examinations are in June. You'll finally experience the pain of studiously studying that I endured back then." Melissa didn't look up as she continued reading. "I'm studiously studying every day. A little humor, Melissa. A little humor. What's the difference between a person without humor and a curly-haired baboon?" Benson said with a smile. Melissa casually glanced at him and said, "That wasn't what you said in the past." She didn't correct him on what the exact difference was between humans and curly-haired baboons, and she instead said, "Do civil servants also finish work so late?" "No, there's been a lot of work recently. As you know." "Oh, you don't." In such a huge reform, the handing over of work and the straightening out of different relationships are very troublesome. Benson swept the mirror in the living room. He couldn't help but lift his hand to comb his hair as he said with a look of displeasure, "Although I'm only a low-ranking employee in the Ministry of Finance, that doesn't stop me from having plenty of work. The only thing to be happy about it that I've finally survived the darn probationary period. I'll soon have a weekly salary of £3. Melissa put down her book, and she walked to the dining hall and said to Benson, "It's dinner time." She paused and said very seriously, "I read in the papers that there's something called Donningsman tree sap that has a significant effect on boosting hair growth." Benson's face immediately had mixed expressions. Whoosh! Amidst the whistle, the long steam locomotive chugged into Backlund. Klein picked up his suitcase and once again stepped into the capital of capitals, the land of hope. He discovered that the smog had thinned significantly, and there wasn't the obvious palish yellow colors. The gas street lamps on the platform were already turned on, dispersing the gloominess and darkness. Surveying the area, Klein walked out the steam locomotive station, took the metro and a carriage, and came to a Church of Storms cemetery outside Westborough. Then, he spent a little bit of money and placed Frunzier Edward's ashes into a partition. By then, this lone soldier had already left Backlund for more than 165 years. After taking a step back, Klein observed it for a moment before using a pen and paper to engrave something on the partition door, Frunzier Edward. He closed his eyes and added, "Every journey has its destination." End of the third volume, Traveler. Chapter 733, The Return Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Under a persistent rain, mingled with the thin fog, the rows of street lamps tried their hardest to shine through the mist. The occasional horse carriage that proceeded down the streets was a common evening sight in Backlund. Apart from these, Klein noticed a few gratifying changes while standing behind the window. Ring! A crisp sound echoed in the air as a two-wheeled mechanical device rushed down the side of the street to the other end of the street. Its frame was black in color, with some parts revealing grayish-white steel. Under the illumination of the street lamps and rain, it sparkled with the beauty of metal. On this device sat a man dressed in a postman's uniform. He kept pedaling with his legs, apparently using a great deal of strength. Behind him was a wooden box that had been painted in green. "It's been promoted very well." The white shirt, black-vested, mature-looking Klein sighed inwardly when he saw this scene. In a few hours within his return to Backlund, he noticed many similar mechanical devices, and they were none other than the bicycles that he had promoted and invested in. From the newspapers, Klein knew that the Backlund Bike Company had done tons of advertisements. It even held a bicycle competition in boroughs like Sherwood and Backlund Bridge so as to garner the attention of others. Apart from that, they also actively promoted it to the government departments such as the Postal Service and the police departments. The results were said to be pretty good. Their pricing strategy had followed Klein's original suggestion, avoiding the middle-upper class who often used horse carriages. Instead, they aimed their target audience at those with weekly salaries of £1.10 solely and above, such as technical workers, students with a decent family background, and clerical employees that often needed to travel outside. Therefore, a bike worth £3 to £5 was affordable for the people in this demographic if they bit the bullet a little. And at the same time, they could flaunt it to the masses who had incomes that were lower than them. The current issue is that Backlund often rains. It's difficult to hold an umbrella while riding a bicycle. The next step should be a raincoat. Klein retracted his gaze, shook his head, and chuckled. The place he stayed at was a high-end hotel in the Hillston borough. It cost him 10 soldi a night, making him feel quite the pinch. However, to match his persona, all he could do was bite the bullet and put up with it. His idea of Dwayne Dantes was that he was a believer of the Evernight goddess and a mysterious tycoon that came from Desi Bay. He had sold his original land and mines, planning to seek out brand new opportunities in Backlund. He had a certain level of interest in obtaining an aristocratic title, but he didn't have the abundant wealth to do so. He had to first expand his social circle and begin making some investments. The benefits of this identity was that it was clearly different from the characters Klein had previously acted as. It allowed him to very naturally interact with people from the middle-upper class, especially members of the Military Officers Club and the Backlund Diocese bishops of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. It made it convenient for Klein to continue his investigations into the Great Smog of Backlund while gathering intel before he made detailed plans to steal the Antigonus family's notebook. There were obvious disadvantages as well. Such a mysterious tycoon would definitely catch the notice of the Nighthawks and mandated punishers, so there was a certain level of background checks that he would have to undergo. According to Klein's experience, such an investigation would be done by the official Beyonder organizations under the premise that nothing important had happened. It could also be handed over to the police department, but in summary, not too much effort would be put into it, as it would be considered a routine check. Therefore, Klein, who was considered quite an expert at disguises, had prepared a second layer to his identity as Dwayne Dantes to his designs, so as to deal with the background inspection. This second layer to his identity was that Dwayne Dantes was a person who had adventured in the southern continent's east and west Balam for some particular reason. He had used a nickname, and he spent more than 10 years in that rather dangerous land filled with opportunity in order to amass a great deal of wealth. Since the origin of his wealth wasn't overboard, he had secretly returned to Desi Bay, and he forged a new identity. He had planned on beginning a new life in Backlund and gradually legalize his wealth. It wasn't rare to see such people in Lone. Their stories were acceptable and imaginable for an investigation. For this identity layer, Klein had left some inconspicuous clues in Conant City so as to indirectly reveal the truth. These clues included but were not limited to the stubs of his scalp tickets from East Balam to Conant City, habits as a result of living in the southern continent for extended periods of time, as well as his wealth of unknown origins. Klein believed that as long as Dwayne Dantes didn't involve himself in any serious Beyonder matters, preparations such as this were enough to fool most routine background inspections. And if he encountered an extremely dedicated official Beyonder who investigated it all the way and was even willing to seek the help of colleagues from the southern continent, then Dwayne Dantes had a third identity layer. It was that he was a cheat who had anti-divination measures to a certain degree. He disguised himself as a mysterious tycoon and spent large amounts of money in investments for this final scam. This identity was enough to get Dwayne Dantes arrested, but the level of attention placed on him wouldn't be too great. This allowed Klein to exit the stage without much trouble. Compared to my first time in Backlund, the creation of a three-layered identity shows how I've really matured significantly. Klein slowly walked to the middle of the room as he cast his gaze on a full-body mirror in the corner. His reflection had black hair and some strands of gray hair. His eyes were deep, but his experiences had left indelible marks on his face. He was a charming middle-aged man with a mature bearing. The design of Dwayne Dantes's identity wasn't difficult for the present Klein. However, stealing the Antigonus family's notebook from behind St. Samuel Cathedral's Cheney's gate was practically an impossible task for any external beyonder. Even a king of angels couldn't guarantee success. Of course, unlike other beyonders, Klein had two advantages. First, he was once a Nighthawk. He had quite a good understanding of the internal procedures they followed, and he knew which matters he could exploit. Therefore, the first solution he eliminated was to become a particular Nighthawk, infiltrate it, and find a chance to pass through Cheney's gate. There was a problem that existed in this. Nighthawks weren't able to randomly enter Cheney's gate, even for the captains and deacons. Something had to happen first before they received the corresponding authority. Furthermore, Cheney's gate had its keepers inside. Randomly entering or taking things would result in an attack on him, causing a battle to break out. Klein didn't wish for his theft to result in any deaths or injury to the members of the Church of the Goddess. After careful consideration, he placed his sights on the keepers. These elders were retired Nighthawks who volunteered to enter Cheney's gate. They were in charge of watching the sealed artifacts, and they were from a different department from the Nighthawks. They entered and exited using the underground passageway through the cathedral, and they never interfered with the Nighthawks' work, nor would they be disturbed by the Nighthawks. Perhaps a result of staying behind Cheney's gate for extended periods of time, these keepers all had certain traits. They had cold auras and had deadpan expressions. Their skin was pale, and they resembled monsters from the deep darkness who were on the border of life and death. Klein believed that it wasn't difficult for him to locate his target if he met one. His initial plan was to rent a place in Northborough near St. Samuel Cathedral. He would hire a butler, a valet, a maidservant, a gardener, a chef, and a carriage driver to have a front as a tycoon. Then, he would often head to the cathedral to pray piously, participate in mass, donate money, and familiarize himself with the bishops and priests. During this process, he would work hard to find suspected keepers. He would choose 2 or 3 targets and observe their habits. When the opportunity arises, he would imprison one of them, change into his appearance or directly possess him, pass through Cheney's gate, and attempt to flip through or take the Antigonus family's notebook away. This was a very crude plan that was merely a train of thought. It needed to be perfected according to the intelligence Klein would slowly acquire. For this matter, Klein's second advantage was the Tarot Club. He had assistants that the Church of the Evernight Goddess and the Nighthawks would never think of. Furthermore, he could consider extending the recruitment of a Backlund diocese Nighthawk or keeper into the gathering. He could then complete the theft through this traitor, just like how Emperor Roselle was used to obtain the Antigonus family's notebook by Zeradal. I've got to frequently head to the cathedral. Only by doing so can I find a target. Klein faced the mirror as he silently nodded. It had to be said that he felt conflicted. If a true Nighthawk or keeper were to betray the church to serve Mr. Fool, his first thought was to unleash divine punishment to get rid of this despicable traitor. After exhaling, he gave a self-deprecating laugh. He wore his double-breasted frock coat and hat, walked out the room, and reached the streets. With an umbrella, he circled to another street. Taking advantage of the distant street lamp and the drizzle, he suddenly changed back into Sherlock Moriarty. Glancing at his wrinkled trousers, Klein stopped a carriage and planned on heading to Isengard Stanton's house in Hillston Borough. Half an hour later, the somewhat ancient and dark building appeared before Klein's eyes. He paid 2 soldi for his ride as he walked steadily around the puddles amidst the drizzle that refracted the yellowish light of dusk before coming to the famous detective's doorstep. Putting away his umbrella, he reached out to ring the doorbell and waited for a moment before seeing a man with a wide face open the door. The man had a head of malt-colored hair, grayish-blue eyes, and high cheekbones. He had the traits of someone from Lenberg or Mason. Mr. Isengard Stanton's new assistant. Someone from the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Klein took off his hat and said with a smile, "Good evening, is Mr. Isengard Stanton home?" "He is. He just had his dinner after a busy day at work," the malt-colored lad replied politely. "May I know who you are?" Klein chortled and said, "Tell the good detective that a friend of his has returned from his vacation." The young man was taken aback as he blurted out, "Mr. Sherlock Moriarty." Chapter 734, Old Friends Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. You actually know me? This means that Mr. Isengard Stanton often mentions me as a friend, or does it mean that the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom knows that I was embroiled in the great smog of Backland? Klein smiled as he nodded in an unperturbed manner. "Yes, I'm Sherlock Moriarty." The grayish-blue-eyed lad immediately gave way as he warmly gestured him in. "Mr. Stanton has been worried about you all this time. He was afraid that you met with trouble. He can now be at peace." Klein handed him his umbrella as he took off his hat and coat while walking in. At this moment, Isengard Stanton, who had sensed something, had put down his papers and pipe, and he left his reclining chair to take a look. "Oh my, Sherlock, you're finally back. It's been so long, my friend." The thin Isengard with grayed sides revealed a smile as he came over with welcoming arms in an attempt to give him a greeting hug. Klein wasn't used to such a custom, so he forced himself to reciprocate it and smile. "Mr. Stanton, this isn't something a believer of wisdom would do." The bishops and priests of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom had their pride, and they seldom gave greeting hugs. But in fact, apart from the boorish Fasak Empire and the liberal Intis Kingdom, such a manner of etiquette was rare in other countries and regions. It only happened among very familiar friends. Isengard took 2 steps back and chuckled. "No, Sherlock. We're never stingy with respect and friendliness towards intelligent friends. In my heart, you're one of the top 5 detectives in all of Backland." "I like that." Klein smiled inwardly as he retorted in jest, "So you're one of the top 3 detectives?" To be praised as having true wisdom by a sequenced 7 believer of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom was really delighting. "I wish that you share the same thoughts as myself," Isengard skillfully and gently replied. Then, he invited him to the living room and to the sofa. He leaned into a reclining chair and picked up his pipe. With a deep breath, he exhaled. "I'm very happy that nothing bad happened to you. You seem especially fine, both in body and mind. How was it? Was Desi Bay fun?" Klein had already prepared an excuse as he calmly smiled. "In fact, I didn't go to Desi Bay. I ended up going to Constant. Heh, I was previously embroiled in some trouble in Backland, so I could only find a place to hide." Sherlock Moriarty was a gentleman from mid-seashore who had a slight accent. It was a very normal choice to return to his hometown after causing trouble. Constant was mid-seashore's capital. "I know," Isengard replied heavily. He didn't inquire about the trouble which Sherlock had involved himself in. Instead, he said with a smile, "In short, welcome back to Backland. Come to me if you need any help." Klein didn't stand on ceremony as he immediately said, "The purpose of my visit was first because it's really has been a while since we last met, and second, I wish that you can sell my shares in the Backland Bike Company on my behalf." Heh, all the documents are in place, and there's no need to carry out any other procedures. In order to act as a mysterious tycoon and to repay Miss Messenger with the 10,000 gold coins, not only did he plan on selling items he had little use for, but he also planned on letting go of the last 10% of his shares in the Backland Bike Company. After all, Sherlock Moriarty wasn't able to appear in a legitimate fashion for a long period of time. "Are you really going to sell it?" Isengard stroked his pipe and said, "Although I've never been a businessman, I can tell that the bike is a product that's of great value and something that can be promoted on a large scale. Its commercial future is like the newly risen sun, and it has yet to reach its limits. You'll be losing plenty of money by selling it now. That's why a buyer will be very willing to raise the price significantly because of this expected value." Klein chuckled. I believe the people who can tell the value of the bike and its future aren't in the minority. And Fromise and Leopard are definitely unwilling to reduce any part of their holdings at this stage. There shouldn't be a problem selling my 10% shares at twice or thrice the normal price. Isengard, the pricing of shares isn't about the present, but about its future. To illustrate an alluring story for the buyer and investor, and drawing a beautiful future is very necessary. Of course, the value and future of the bike don't require additional input from me. Anyone with any business sense can tell. The only problem stems in the rubber production. Klein silently added inwardly. The pricing of shares isn't about the present, but about its future. Isengard softly repeated Klein's words, and after a moment he sincerely sighed. Sherlock, perhaps you should be involved in the business world. However, there will always be many accidents present. To dare to take risks is equivalent to chivalry in business. Oh well, I admit that I've recently been in dire need of large sums of cash, Klein replied with a smile. Isengard picked up his pipe as he gave it a satisfactory suck. You've convinced me. I will specially hire a lawyer and accountant to confirm the market value of Backlund Bike Company. Then, I'll add on an estimate of the expected profits and sell that 10% of yours. The corresponding fees and taxes will be deducted from the amount received. Oh. How should I contact you? It seems like your rental contract for the house at Minsk Street has lapsed. Klein obviously wouldn't expose his present identity. He said, having prepared for it, you can post news on the Tussock Times, Backlund Daily Tribune, and other newspapers about the sale of the shares to make more people know. Only when there's competition would there be better price negotiations. When it's sold, you can publish a notice to indicate that the deal has been closed and that further inquiries won't be entertained. And when I see that notice, I'll come visit you. Isengard was no stranger and it came to communicating over published notices in the newspapers. He nodded and said, no problem. Of course, all expenses will be deducted from the final sum received. With his main goal accomplished, Klein stood up and reached out his hand. Thank you for your help, Isengard. I need to leave. We can talk in the future. Isengard didn't hold him back as he sent him straight out the door. Klein circled to a nearby street and took a carriage to the Bravehearts Bar as he admired Bravehearts Bar's night view in the drizzle. He planned on re-establishing all the news and resource channels which Sherlock Moriarty used to have. After entering the noisy bar, he didn't head for the bar counter to order some beer and make inquiries. Instead, he circled around the boxing ring in preparation to leave, so that he could wait for Miss Sharon to appear on the carriage outside. At this moment, the door to a billiard room creaked open. Ian, with an old coat, walked out with newspapers in hand. His red eyes did a cursory sweep when he suddenly noticed a familiar figure. He gaped his mouth, but he didn't say his name. He greeted in pleasant surprise, "Good evening, sir. Is there anything I can help you with?" "Not for now. I'm only here to visit an old friend." Klein smiled warmly. As he spoke, he noticed that the papers in Ian's hand was News at Sea. On it was a striking headline, shocking. Crazy adventurer made a fugitive. Crazy adventurer. Klein intuitively believed that it had nothing to do with him. Ian noticed his gaze and raised the newspapers with a smile. This is one of the rare up-to-date reports from News at Sea because the bounties have already appeared in various places. The crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, plotted to bring harm on the City of Generosity, and he has been proven to be a member of a cult. In this incident, thanks to the Church of Storms and the military, no one from Byam was injured. But Admiral of Blood Senior, who was involved in the matter, vanished as a result. It's suspected that he has been killed by Gehrman Sparrow. Guess how much of a bounty they are offering for Gehrman Sparrow? £50,000. It has exceeded Admiral of Blood's, and it's almost reached that of Admiral Hell's. £50,000. Klein's heart stirred. He calmed the palpitations in his heart as he replied with a smile, "Unfortunately, few people can claim such a bounty. He pointed at the bar's entrance and said, "I'll come to look for you again when I have the time." "All right." Ian didn't ask further as he mentioned in passing, "Is Mr. White from the Harvest Church your friend? That fellow, Emlyn, is finally willing to get out of the house. For those primordial moon believers." Klein nodded. "That's right." After saying that, he squeezed through the crowd and pushed open the door to leave the Bravehearts bar. After getting onto a rental carriage, Klein cast his gaze outside, awaiting Miss Sharon's appearance. Of course, he wasn't certain that she was here. Months had passed, so it was very possible that this Lady Merrick had switched their area of activity. Silently, Klein's spiritual perception was triggered as he turned to look at the window. On the glass which could reflect the night view, a young lady in a black bonnet and Gothic-styled black dress clearly appeared. Turning his head, Klein saw Miss Sharon sitting opposite him. Her pale blonde hair, blue eyes, and pale expression didn't seem any different from before. "Good evening." Klein, who no longer needed to act as Gairman Sparrow, greeted first. Sharon got up a little and curtsied. Realizing that she might have read news at sea, he was momentarily unable to find a topic for small talk. He cleared his throat and directly said, "I killed Senor." "Okay." Sharon nodded slightly, indicating that she was aware. Klein smiled as he continued, "If Merrick still needs the beyonder characteristic of a wraith, he can wait and prepare the money needed. Once I find a replacement, I'll sell Senor to him." Sharon didn't ask what replacement meant as she replied, "After seeing that piece of news, he has been awaiting your return." "Very good." Klein chuckled. He reached out for his collar, pulled out a silver necklace and said, "Senor's lucky item. You should know about it, right?" Sharon tersely answered as she waited for Klein to continue. "I plan to sell either this or the biological poison bottle. Would you, or people from your circle, be interested?" Klein took the initiative to ask. Chapter 735, Another Visit. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Sharon was silent for 2 seconds before she said, "I'll help ask." "It means you need to consider it." "That's right. The negative effects of scales of luck does leave one hesitant. However, biological poison bottle is really compatible with a wraith. If it wasn't because I'm short on money, and how it lowers my immunity, making me easily fall sick, I wouldn't be willing to sell it. It's rather effective in an ambush." Klein vaguely grasped Sharon's intentions as he stuffed the silver necklace back into his collar. He asked after some thought, "Which power of a high-sequence prisoner pathway beyonder makes all surrounding lifeless items attack one's target?" "Puppet," Sharon succinctly replied. "It's the power of a sequence 4 puppet. Turning themselves into a lifeless puppet, so that they are able to control all lifeless objects in a certain range. Advancing further, will they be able to directly influence the mystical items of an enemy?" Klein nodded in enlightenment and asked, "Then, do you know that demigod?" He immediately described in detail the appearance of the elder who had attacked him outside by him. "Shanks," Sharon calmly said a name. "I actually wish that you could share with me more about him." Klein knew Miss Sharon's style as he said with an exasperated smile, "Then, do you know Zatwin? He was the mentor of the Naturism sex leader in Oravi Island." "The demigod who was pursuing us," Sharon answered without hiding anything or any emotions, like a doll. "That's the one who made me feel like the chairs, tables, and curtains wished to kill me." What a coincidence. However, it wasn't arranged. It just proves that as a secret organization, the Rose School of Thought, with a history of over 1,000 years, doesn't have that many demigods. Perhaps it has about the same number as the Aurora Order. The number of saints number around 5, and the number of angels and Grade 0 sealed artifacts number about 2 to 3. Of course, this is also because they were suppressed by the 7 major churches, reducing their headquarters to colonies. At the height of their powers, they might have had far more than these. Klein thought and asked again, then, do you know the Rose School of Thought member that is able to make an entire mountain tremble with just one arm? He planned on describing the arm's traits, but he realized that he hadn't dared to look straight at it. Sharon listened quietly as her eyes darted around as though they came to life. She asked with a clear voice, "What did you encounter?" "A saint, an angel, as well as Sea King, an Aurora Order demigod, a monster byproduct from the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death." Klein silently made a self-deprecating comment as he said with a wry smile, "I got on the bad side with the Mother Tree of Desire, and I suffered an ambush from the Rose School of Thought. Thankfully, I was in Byam, allowing the Church of Storms and the Kingdom's military to take action. I also threw out an item corrupted with the true Creator's aura, as well as something related to the Numinous Episcopate. In short, it was chaos, and I took the opportunity to escape." He replied frankly, apart from hiding the existence of Miss Messenger and Mr. Azik. As for the matter of the true Creator, he believed that Miss Sharon had long known that he wasn't affected by the ravings. This could be explained by a timely psychological intervention or psychic treatment. Mother Tree of Desire, Sharon murmured the name as rare emotional upheavals slowly appeared in her eyes. Klein didn't have the interpretation abilities of a spectator, and he was unable to tell what was exactly on Sharon's mind. He could only sense that she felt a little fear and loathing. Sharon quickly restrained her abnormal reaction, turning back into an extremely exquisite doll. She looked at Sherlock Moriarty and said, "You are very lucky and very mysterious." Klein smiled without a word, neither lying nor explaining. Sharon didn't inquire as she said, "You might have met Sua. He is an abomination born 922 years ago and claims to be the son of the chained god. He is also the present leader of the Rose School of Thought." "No way. The Rose School of Thought sent its leader and a demigod to deal with me. I'm just a mere Sequence 5. If not for Orange Light Hilarian's warning, I might have already been captured by the Rose School of Thought." Klein felt a chill run down his back again as he asked, "Is Abomination the name of the prisoner Pathways Sequence 2 or Sequence 1? "Probably." Sharon didn't give an affirmative answer. At this moment, without waiting for Klein's response, she said, "William Street has been destroyed." Klein had pondered what kind of reaction he should have when Miss Sharon raised the topic, so he immediately frowned. "By who? When did it happen?" "The Nighthawks and Machinery Hive Mind. About 2 months ago." Sharon had clearly gathered the corresponding intelligence. Klein nodded solemnly and, after some deep thought, said, "Perhaps we've neglected something. That evil spirit didn't need us to rescue it. It was still controlling Baronet Pound. Could it be that something happened to that gentleman, incurring the notice of the Nighthawks and Machinery Hive Minds?" Klein offered a guess filled with half-truths without utmost confidence. Sharon nodded. "Baronet Pound died during one of his revelries." "That's it? That's the end to Alista Tudor's final bloodline." Klein thought and said, "How's the situation with William Street at the moment?" "Some high-rise buildings are being built," Sharon described without much of an expression. "People monitored it in secret at the beginning, but the surveillance decreased with time, diminishing to 0 early last month." Klein pondered for a few seconds and said, "Have you gone down to explore it?" Sharon's eyes swept his face. "No. This is her remembering our unwritten agreement, to explore it together because we found it together. What a noble-hearted lady. The Rose School of Thought's temperance faction is infinitely times better than the indulgence faction." Klein probed, "Shall we go now?" "All right," Sharon succinctly expressed her stance. Klein immediately instructed the carriage driver, and he changed the destination to William Street at the intersection of West Borough and Empress Borough. Along the way, he casually mentioned what he heard and saw at sea, as well as the experiences that didn't involve his secrets. Although Sharon didn't answer him, she listened attentively, seemingly interested. This made Klein recall the time when he first got to know her as Miss Bodyguard. She sat on the illusory high-back chair in the oriel window's glass. Her right hand held her cheek as she seriously listened to his conversation with Ian. She had great potential in being a spectator. The carriage passed through the silent streets in the drizzle before finally arriving near William Street. Without approaching the area, Klein and Sharon discovered that the area had become a huge worksite. After circling to the region that matched the underground ruins, they stood behind a huge tree with a lush canopy. Klein said to Sharon, who wasn't drenched by the rain despite not holding an umbrella, "Let's head down." As the rain fell, they passed through Sharon's blonde hair and body before hitting the ground. "All right." Sharon didn't ask how Sherlock Moriarty was planning on heading down with her. Klein reached his hand into his pocket and easily removed the wall of spirituality, and he opened the iron cigar case. Beside him, a figure suddenly appeared. It was none other than Admiral of Blood Senior, who wore a dark red coat and an old triangular hat. "He will head down in my stead," Klein said with a smile. Immediately following that, he controlled his marionette in a composed manner. Senor immediately pressed his hand to his chest and bowed at Sharon. "Good evening. I'm honored to work with you." Sharon swept her gaze across Klein and Senor, and without a word, her body sank into the soil. Miss Sharon seems to detest Senor quite significantly." Klein curled his lips and made Admiral of Blood rapidly turn into a wraith and sink. As for himself, he leaned on a tree, half closed his eyes as he seriously controlled the marionette. There wasn't anyone around him, and the drizzle was light and the streetlights dim. Slowly, Klein found the feeling of being a marionettist. His vision and Senor's vision overlapped with one another as he saw black-brown soil, squirming worms, and miscellaneous items in between the rocks. As they passed through layers of obstacles, they arrived at the region where the ruin once was. The dome ceiling had collapsed and the stone columns had snapped. The area was filled with soil and rubble, looking nothing like it once was. Such a scene made Klein believe that the humanoid statues of the 6 deities had been completely destroyed. To his joy, their location was relatively close to the room which sealed the evil spirit. That meant that he didn't need to worry that any subsequent exploration would exceed the 100-meter range for the control of his marionette. Amidst the smell of soil and rot, they soon entered the previously menacing room. However, between the rubble and soil, there were only a few signs of crushed bone and rotting clothes. The dark gold and deep blue light from before had all vanished. The Beyonder characteristics have been taken away by the Nighthawks and machinery hive mind. Senor's expression twitched as it perfectly reflected Klein's mood. Sharon turned around in the dark solid environment and gently shook her head. "They didn't send anyone in. There are no traces of living creatures existing in here." "That's right. If a living person had entered and exited this room over the past half-year, a wraith should be able to sense it. Besides, the deity statues obviously cannot be seen by the Nighthawks and machinery hive mind. Where did those Beyonder characteristics go?" As Klein frowned, Senor had a similar reaction. Could it be that the evil spirit wasn't completely obliterated? It had long escaped. Klein thought about it when he suddenly came to an alarming conclusion. He held back his emotions and made Senor pass through the soil and rubble-filled room with Sharon, and they arrived at the spot where the bloody door previously stood. And at that moment, only a few splinters proved that it existed before. After proceeding forward a few meters, the two truly entered the room where the evil spirit was sealed. It had likewise been destroyed and buried. Klein used Senor's body and eyes to look for clues as he flew about. "There should be a black high-back chair here." Sharon stopped and pointed at the splinters above 2 rocks. Klein instantly recalled the scene he had once seen in the dream. The young man suspected of being Medici had sat on a high-back chair, his head drooped low as though dead. Sharon didn't pause. She continued proceeding in the compressed soil in search for any traces. Suddenly, she spoke again. "There should be one here." "Another one?" "A second black high-back chair." Klein floated over in surprise. Chapter 736, Third Chair Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Senior, in his wraith form, passed through the thick soil and rocks under Klein's control, arriving beside Sharon. He saw a damaged armrest which had asymmetrical patterns buried there, looking rather similar, but also different from the splinters they discovered moments ago. The armrest wasn't pure black in color. Their patterns exuded a dark red color, as though it was an intersection of iron and blood. Recalling the scene from his nightmare, Klein determined that this wasn't the high-back chair that the entity suspected to be Medici sat on. This was the second chair. The room that sealed the evil spirit had at least 2 high-back chairs. Klein and Sharon didn't say a word as they circled around in different directions to search for other clues. Before long, they discovered the evidence of a third high-back chair. It was the leg of a chair, mainly dark red in color with pure black patterns. It was completely different from the other 2 kinds of splinters. Perhaps it's a problem caused by the asymmetrical trait of the fourth epoch. Klein knew Sharon's style, volunteering to speak and saying something even he couldn't believe. In the nightmare that resulted from the evil spirit's influence, the colors of the high-back chairs were, at the very least, uniform. Sharon shook her head slightly. 3 has more of a ritualistic feel. She was implying that the innocent victims of Blood Emperor Alista Tudor weren't just one person back then. Perhaps a ritual had been held in the room that sealed the evil spirit. Klein was taken aback by what he heard as a scene flashed through his mind. In a spacious and dark room, 3 high-back chairs of different styles were placed around a particular point in the center. And sitting on each chair was a breathless humanoid creature with a drooping head. Among them included Red Angel Medici. The scene became clearer as Klein instantly connected 2 additional matters together. The main ingredients of the Sequence 0 Black Emperor's potion is the uniqueness and 2 Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics, excluding one's own Beyonder characteristic. Blood Emperor Alista Tudor had apparently forcefully jumped from the Black Emperor pathway's Sequence 1 Prince of Disorder to the Red Priest Sequence 0, which wasn't a neighboring pathway. As a result, he became a half-crazy true god. As his thoughts whirred, Klein quickly had a theory. This room had once held a Sequence 0 advancement ritual needed for a true god. Of course, according to the complicated ritual needed by a Black Emperor, this was only part of the requirement. The pathway that represented war had clearly required the entire continent to be in chaos and at war to match in scale. And Blood Emperor Alista Tudor doesn't have the corresponding Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristic, so his Red Priest potion requires 3 Sequence 1 angels or sealed artifacts to provide him with the Beyonder characteristics. There happens to be 3 high-back chairs here. Yes, the evil spirit suspected to be Red Angel Medici said that to help it escape its seal, one should find direct descendants of the Sauron, Einhorn, and Medici family, and then extract 10 milliliters of blood and mix them with holy water. Sauron and Einhorn wield the Hunter pathway and are also angel families of the Red Priest Beyonder pathway. They've existed since the 4th epoch to this day. One of them has already waned, only capable of controlling the spy network and a military faction in Intis, while the other remains the royal family of Fasak. Thoughts flashed through Klein's mind as he had a new belief regarding what had happened in the room, as well as the true identity of the evil spirit. On the other 2 high-back chairs sat the ancestors of the Sauron and Einhorn families, Sequence 1 angels. Together with War Angel Medici, who very likely possessed the pathway's uniqueness, all the main ingredients of the Red Priest potion were gathered. And that evil spirit is highly likely to not be the pure Red Angel Medici. It might include the remnant psyche and hatred of the Sauron and Einhorn family's ancestors. Man, this place once sacrificed 3 Sequence 1 angels. Before they died, their curses and the ritual itself left effects, making this room become abnormally horrifying, as well as sealing it. Thankfully I reported this to the churches ahead of time to let them deal with it. Otherwise, we might have died here if we relied on ourselves. It would be the same even if Miss Sharon and I advanced to Sequence 4. We would become food for the evil spirit. Klein felt a sense of fear and joy. Meanwhile, he began to understand the reason why the Red Priest card had landed in the hands of the evil spirit. After all, the former highest-ranking members of a pathway were buried here in this underground ruin. The convergence of Beyonder characteristics would naturally lure Beyonders of the same pathway over without any deviations. Furthermore, as Roselle once said, whatever separates will definitely converge, and whatever converges will definitely separate. After Blood Emperor Alista Tudor perished, the true God characteristic he possessed, which is the sequence 0 characteristic, will likely split into 4 pieces. One is the uniqueness, an abstract item or concept, while the remaining 3 are 3 sets of sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics. If it wasn't because of that, the corresponding Beyonder pathway wouldn't have any more sequence 1s when someone becomes a god. Could 1 or 2 of these sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics be attracted, entering the sealed room? This is likely one of the reasons why the card of blasphemy was lured over. The more Klein thought, the more he felt that he had previously underestimated the evil spirit. They live up to being angels who advanced from conspirers. Standing under the tree, Klein controlled Seigneur to say, perhaps it really is a ritual. It's related to Blood Emperor Alista Tudor. The scale and level involved must be great. Sharon added after silently listening, Sauron, Einhorn, Medici. Miss Sharon is also suspecting if the 3 high-back chairs once belonged to different angels from the details requested by the evil spirit. Klein thought for a moment, and he divulged something through Seigneur. Blood Emperor Alista Tudor is likely a true god from the Hunter pathway. The card of blasphemy is represented by the Red Priest. Sharon remained silent for a few seconds as though she came to a realization regarding certain matters as she said, that card is gone. She was referring to the Red Priest card which the evil spirit had formerly shown them. Perhaps that evil spirit had long escaped before the Nighthawks and machinery hive mind destroyed this place. Klein shared his theory. And it had taken away all the Beyonder characteristics and that Red Priest card. Sharon silently surveyed the area and said, it's very crafty. It wouldn't leave behind any obvious clues. That's right. The Beyonder characteristics outside the sealed room are clearly not at sequence 4. To an evil spirit who was once a king of angels, they don't have any allure. Likewise for the Red Priest card. It can be understood that it took away the things in the room, but why didn't it leave anything? It's like telling others something like, haha, I've fooled you. I've already successfully escaped. Catch me if you can. Wait, perhaps that's exactly what it wishes to convey. As Klein thought, he suddenly found it amusing as he made Seigneur speak. No, being crafty doesn't necessarily equate to not leaving clues. The sequence 8 of the Hunter pathway is provoker. At that moment, the red angel that surfaced in his mind had the picture of Anderson Hood over it. Sharon listened silently as she gaped her mouth slightly, but she didn't say a word. Similarly, Klein was speechless. He felt that the Beyonders of the Hunter pathway truly had a crystal-clear style. In comparison, the red-haired Helene didn't appear anything like someone from the Sauron family. However, she was rather talented at provoking Vice Admiral ailment. Yes, back then, the Sauron family members also infuriated Roselle terribly. Klein silently exhaled as he lampooned. The silent mood was soon broken by Klein. Seigneur looked around and said a joke, perhaps that's the reason why they were captured and brought here. Who was helping Alista Tudor? Sharon's translucent figure asked, but she didn't seem to look forward to the answer. Perhaps it's the 6 deities. Klein recalled the 6 deity statues in the hall. However, he had second thoughts. However, the 7 deities supported the Trunsoist Empire. The Sauron and Einhorn families were powerful aristocrats of the empire. Of course, it cannot be ruled out that they first supported Tudor, and later had a falling out after he went mad. If it's not the 6 deities, does it mean that there are other deities supporting Alista Tudor? Who would it be? Klein thought in silence. Sharon didn't stay any longer as she floated up to the surface, returning to the tree. Klein stored away Seigneur's wraith, allowing it to enter the gold coin inside the iron cigar case. Then, he asked in passing, "Actually, I've always been curious. Where do the powers of pure evil spirits and wraiths who do not have Beyonder characteristics come from?" "The spirit world," Sharon answered simply. "The conservation of Beyonder characteristics, but the source of Beyonder powers isn't necessarily the same." "Yes, perhaps the spirit world itself is the product of some Beyonder characteristics." Klein nodded and looked at the soil beneath his feet. "I'll continue investigating the whereabouts of the evil spirit. I'll inform you if there's anything." He planned on asking Rhodes later. With that said, he took out a pen and paper, scribbled down the method to summoning his messenger, and handed it over. "You can write to me if there's anything." Sharon received the piece of paper and seriously looked at it. "I'll be in the Bravehearts bar. Letters can be mailed to 126, Guard Street, Hillston Address it to Ma'am Miriam." "All right." Klein stuffed his pen into his pocket. In front of Sharon, he used a ritualistic dagger to create a wall of spirituality and resealed the iron cigar case. Following that, he crossed the street to stop a carriage like a gentleman, sending Sharon all the way back to the Backland Bridge area. After doing this, he returned to the high-end hotel in Hillston Borough. Midway, he changed his appearance and switched carriages. Byam. Inside the seaweed bar. Danitz, who had spent some time drifting at sea, once again stepped back into the city of generosity. He planned on helping the resistance handle some matters. He pressed down on his cap, sat at the corner of the bar counter, and prepared to first hear about the recent news. He didn't wish to become a bounty reward due to untimely or inaccurate intelligence. At this moment, he heard an adventurer beside him say to his companion, "Hey, do you think Gehrman Sparrow will get someone to claim Admiral of Blood's bounty on his behalf?" "Ah." Danitz subconsciously looked up, looking at the speaker with a blank, confused look. Chapter 737, Official Appearance Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Why would the madman, Gehrman Sparrow, need to find someone to claim Admiral of Blood's bounty on his behalf? That's not right. Why would he be able to claim the bounty? Danitz suddenly snapped out of his confusion and grasped the crux of the matter. He immediately lowered his head to prevent himself from exposing his shock and confusion. The adventurers beside him continued their conversation. How would that be possible? No one would dare to claim it on his behalf. That's right, unless they wished to bear the wrath of the Church of Storms or selling out Gehrman Sparrow. 42,000 pounds. If I can receive that sum of money, I'll immediately head to Backland to be a tycoon. Huh, wouldn't you be enjoying yourself in the Red Theatre for half a year first? Perhaps Gehrman Sparrow can claim it from Intis, Faysac, or Fainapotter. Although it wouldn't be as much as 42,000 pounds, it's definitely in no way a low amount. As the adventurers conversed, they began imagining their lives after obtaining 42,000 pounds. They even had a conflict of opinions and began arguing with flushed faces. No way. Are they implying that Gehrman has finished off Admiral of Blood? No, although that madman always had the intention of doing so, he lacks the required support that he needs. He needs to work with Captain Anderson Hood. Danitz stood up, pressed down his cap, and kept his head down. He rushed towards the billiard and card rooms where there were newspapers placed there. Just as he left, the few adventurers from before looked at his back and spoke in hushed tones. Do you recognize him? It's obvious that something is wrong with how he was acting so suspiciously. I didn't get a good look, but I think he's a pirate who's here to gather intel. Shall we? An adventurer gestured, slicing his hand across his throat. Perhaps it's someone we can't afford to offend. Let's wait and see. Another adventurer stopped his companion's actions. Danitz entered an empty billiard room, came to the corner, and picked up a stack of newspapers. He quickly flipped through them, and slowly, his expression twisted. What did that madman do? He really finished off Admiral of Blood. It's only been a few months, and his strength has risen to such a level. Furthermore, the papers didn't even mention Anderson Hood. Danitz was alarmed and thankful that he wisely chose to submit in front of Gehrman Sparrow. Otherwise, people would have long seen the news of him being hunted in exchange for bounty money. No, no. Back then, my death wouldn't have been published. Man, Gehrman Sparrow is really a member of a cult. As he thought, Danitz suddenly froze like a statue. That was because he was apparently, probably, likely a member of that cult. The church and military often likes to exaggerate. Yes, it's a secret organization, not a cult. Danitz consoled himself before having the feeling that the organization backing Gehrman Sparrow was surprisingly mysterious and abnormally powerful. The successful hunting of Senor, one of the 7 pirate admirals, was evidence. Phew. Danitz exhaled as he apprehensively praised the fool inwardly, expressing his desires to handle matters seriously. In a small building near the Governor-General's office, Eland and Oz Kent walked out. It's finally over, Eland sighed as he wore his captain's hat. Oz Kent rubbed his red brandy nose and added with a sigh, that's right. They had been interrogated while separated for 2 full days because of Gehrman Sparrow. They were faced with interrogators who were best at such matters. Thankfully, Eland had never hidden anything from the beginning. He had reported to his superiors that Gehrman Sparrow was of unknown origins, but that he was friendly to the military. It had nothing to do with him since the decision of making this crazy adventurer an informant while having his background investigated was made by the higher-ups. As for Oz Kent, there weren't any problems at all. He had followed regular protocol when claiming the bounty for Gehrman Sparrow. As they slowly walked towards the entrance in the middle of the garden, Eland said with a sigh, who knew that Gehrman Sparrow was that crazy and powerful, according to the little information that they knew, finishing off Admiral of Blood was just one of the most ordinary and trivial matters that Gehrman Sparrow had done that day. And such a crazy person had made the choice of entering the dangerous Banshee to save a few passengers and crew members who had merely expressed their friendship to him. Eland later learned that the dangers lurking in Banshee had far exceeded his imagination. The Church of Storms had directly destroyed the entire place. If I had told the interrogators that Gehrman Sparrow has a soft and kind heart, they will definitely think I'm lying. Humans are really a mass of contradictions. Eland silently shook his head. After hearing Eland's poignant remark, Oz Kent replied with a wry smile, back then, I thought you introduced me to a relatively strong adventurer. But in the end, he even finished off Admiral of Blood. Damn it. I even think he has the strength to become the 5th king. You wouldn't doubt what I say if you look at the forest and those nearby mountains. That place, it's like, Eland glanced at Oz Kent and finished his sentence for him, it's like it was blasted by the coastal defenses more than 100 times over. That's right. Oz Kent agreed with Eland's description. By then, the two had walked out the main entrance. Eland looked at the night sky with twinkling stars and the dark crimson moon. After a few seconds of silence, he adjusted his collar and said, let's hope he doesn't return to the sea again, Byam. 6, Sphere Street. Dressed in children's clothes, Denton ran up to the study and said to his elder sister who was practicing her sketching, Donna, they say that Uncle Sparrow is a bad guy, a cultist, and a murderer. They even showed me the newspapers. Donna turned her head as she wrinkled her nose. No way. Uncle Sparrow is a righteous, brave, and kind adventurer. We saw it with our own eyes. These are definitely more reliable than the papers. She hesitated for a moment before eloquently saying, although he had a very terrifying and ugly appearance, it was the price for his dreams and the power to protect. Denton, remember, the papers often like to fabricate content based on rumors or hearsay. Yeah. Denton nodded heavily. I've already cursed them. Donna praised her brother and subconsciously looked out. She saw that the street lamps had cast their light into their garden. It was tranquil, serene, and gentle. Hillston Borough, inside a high-class inn. Klein folded a white handkerchief and placed it in his left breast pocket, and he raised his hand to retrieve his half-top hat. Today was the day for the mysterious tycoon, Dwayne Dantes, to officially appear in public. He didn't wait for the sale of the bike company shares or the mystical items, and he planned on first using the remaining £2,962 he had to cover his initial expenses. This was sufficient, as it was equivalent to 6 to 7 years of an upper-middle-class family's income. A Rhodes didn't enter my dream last night. This means that he's unable to sense my return to Backlund without any close contact. That's a good thing. Yes, I'll contact it with the radio transceiver tonight to inquire about the evil spirit. I won't need to go through this hassle in the future, Klein mumbled inwardly as he held his cane and walked out of the hotel. At that moment, the sun was shining through the thin mist, elating the moods of the pedestrians. Klein got onto a carriage, and he went straight for Sherwood Borough's City Family Servant Assistance Association at 9, Canolawell Street. He planned on hiring an experienced butler, and get him to organize the servants needed for a villa. In the City Family Servant Assistance Association, Baylin ended a conversation with a male colleague that came to talk to her. She lowered her head to clean up the 2 drops of black tea on her lotus leaf-colored dress. At that moment, she heard a mellow and heavy voice that time had left its mark on. "Good morning, ma'am." Baylin hurriedly looked up and towards the reception. She saw a gentleman in his 40s, wearing a tailcoat made of silk and carrying a golden-laid cane. Apart from the 3 buttons on his clothes, there was a golden chain that extended into his pocket. This gentleman had a pair of deep blue eyes, and he was good-looking. Even the tiny white patches on the side of his hair had added to the air he exuded. Just a smile from him made Baylin feel her cheeks turn warm. "Sir, how may I be of service?" "Ah, right. How may I address you?" Baylin hurriedly got up and said. "Dwayne Dantes," Klein warmly replied with a smile. "I wish to hire a butler, a good one. Mr. Dantes, please wait a moment. Have a seat." Baylin hurriedly led Klein to the guest area, and she reached out to point at a cloth sofa. Klein held a smile without rushing or nagging her. He very patiently sat down and awaited the staff to provide him with a list of names of the butlers. "What a gentleman. Oh no, I forgot to ask him what requirements he has." Baylin raised her hand to touch her cheeks and said, "Mr. Dantes, what kind of butlers are you looking for?" Klein was already prepared as he replied with a mellow voice, "It's best if they have served in a noble family before." This aided Dantes in widening his social circle. Baylin gradually grasped her professional knowledge as she said in detail, "Such butlers are rare. As you know, nobles seldom change their butlers unless they're unable to provide an effective service. Furthermore, even if they aren't able to be a butler, they're able to fill other positions in a noble household. In addition, the wealthy often have a considerable desire towards such butlers, and they're willing to offer salaries with a premium. Mr. Dantes, we do have the kinds you are looking for, but their annual salaries are above £100. That makes the weekly salary to be about £2 and up. An ordinary butler's annual salary is £40 to £80, which is 15 solely to £1.10 solely a week. That appears to be at the level of a technical worker's salary, but the master will provide room, food, clothes, charcoal, and other necessities. A butler practically has zero expenditure. An annual salary of £100 and above is really expensive." Klein quickly did the math as he replied as though he didn't take much notice, "No problem. As long as they're good butlers." Chapter 738, Life of a Tycoon Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios, please wait a moment. "Would you like coffee or tea?" Baylin asked warmly. Klein laughed and replied, "I enjoyed coffee when I was younger, the rich and fragrant kind, but now, I prefer black tea." "I prefer black tea as well." "Then, a cup of Marquis black tea," Baylin suggested with a smile. The coffee and tea provided to guests at the City Family Servant Assistance Association were ordinary in quality, ranging from low to medium quality. Marquis black tea was tea that Beilin had brought from home for her own enjoyment. Klein wasn't a simpleton, and he was great at observing. Just as he walked into the door, he would take in everything about his surroundings without anyone noticing. He discovered that the coffee and tea container placed in the display case were very ordinary, and he believed that the quality was definitely lacking. Therefore, he believed that Marquis black tea was likely reserved by the Association for VIPs, or it belonged to the lady before him. Regardless, it expressed how sincere she was. He didn't expose her as he smiled. "Thank you, you leave me unable to reject your suggestion. How may I address you, ma'am?" "Beilin, just call me Beilin," Beilin said with a smile which resembled a blooming flower. She immediately briskly walked inside, and she selected suitable candidates from her colleague. Then, she returned to the reception counter, picked up a tin container, and skillfully brewed a cup of black tea. "Sigh, with a good-looking face and a good disposition while being dressed in a way that speaks volumes of my status, I can still sense the friendliness from a beautiful girl even though I'm middle-aged." Klein was having such an experience for the first time as he couldn't help but sigh. This made him further understand the importance of the faceless principle of ultimately being yourself. If he didn't keep this in mind and lost himself to the benefits brought about by his appearance, he would keep maintaining the corresponding appearance, resulting in him forgetting or even rejecting his former self, and he would gradually lose his identity. Soon, Beilin carried a white gold-rimmed porcelain teacup and placed it in front of Dwayne Dantes. She said with a smile, "It still needs some time to cool down." Klein looked down at the cup, and he said half-jokingly, "Perfect, this gives me the time to adjust my mood to more formally face this cup of black tea." His compliments and gratitude made Beilin feel even better. She found him a true gentleman, one who knew his way with words. "He's definitely not a believer of the Lord of Storms." Beilin combed her slightly curly brown hair, and she returned to the room to hurry her colleague. Before long, she came over with a stack of documents and sat on the single-seater beside him. "After the screening, we have 3 suitable butlers. I'll briefly introduce them to you. The first person is Mr. Asnia, age 55. He once served Viscount Yorkville, but after this Viscount had a failed mining prospect investment, his family fell into a particular financial situation, and he had to sell its land and manors while terminating many of its servants. In the past decade, he was hired by 2 tycoons, and he has contributed significantly to the management of their households." As she spoke, Beilin's brown eyes sparkled like 2 stars hid in them. She exuded the unique vibes of a teenage girl. Klein nodded slightly and said, "Then why did he leave the 2 tycoons?" Beilin replied with a smile, "The first tycoon invested greatly in East Balam, and his whole family had moved there. Mr. Asnia wasn't willing to leave Backlund, so he offered to resign. The second tycoon's health isn't too good, and he had handed the family business to his son who has a butler he trusts more. Mr. Asnia is a believer of the Evernight goddess, and his political inclinations is with the Conservative Party. He expects an annual salary of £130. May goddess bless him." Klein tapped 4 spots in a clockwise manner on his chest, forming the sign of the crimson moon. Beilin's eyes lit up as she asked, "Mr. Dantes, are you a believer of the goddess?" "Of course." Klein nodded with a smile without explaining further. "It's no wonder he's so gentle." Beilin praised inwardly as she continued introducing, Mr. Reback, age 48. He once served the Negan family, and he was the deputy butler for a long period of time, as well as an assistant to the butler. Later, after a transaction, he became Baron Syndraza's butler. Shortly after Duke Negan was assassinated, Mr. Reback, whose contract came to an end, didn't receive a new contract from the Baron, so he had no choice but to seek our help. He's not a staunch believer of the Lord of Storms, and his personality is without problems. His political inclination is with the Conservative Party. He expects an annual salary of £120. Klein listened silently, nodding from time to time as a response, but he didn't cut off Beilin's description. Balin flipped through the documents and took a few glances and spoke again. The third person is Mr. Walter, age 42. He had been the land steward and assistant butler at Viscount Conrad's household. Due to certain matters, he had a conflict with the butler, and he chose to leave. He expects an annual salary of £115. He's a believer of the Evernight goddess, and his political inclination is with the new party. Orovie Island's new Governor-General is a member of Viscount Conrad's family. This family pledges loyalty to the royal family. The relevant information quickly flashed through Klein's mind. After the introduction, Balin handed over the stack of documents. Mr. Dantes, who do you wish to choose? Klein fell silent for a few seconds before saying with a smile, let's do this. Let the three of them come to where I live tomorrow at 9 a.m. I'll meet them and have a chat with them to make the final decision. He knew that such associations didn't provide lodging, and it was purely an agency. Even if he made the selection right there and then, he still had to wait until the afternoon or tomorrow to see his butler. Therefore, he decided to have a small interview to select the person that matched his intentions the best. No problem, Balin said with a smile. May I know your address? Klein sipped the black tea, picked up a pen and paper from the table, and wrote down the location and name of the hotel he was staying in. You just came to Backlund? Balin blurted out a question when she saw it. Only then did she realize that Mr. Dwayne Dantes's skin was slightly darker than normal. It was slightly bronze-colored, seemingly a result of tanning. It gave him quite a rugged flavor. Yes, he doesn't have a Backlund accent. Balin slowly recalled more details. Klein smiled. I came from Desi Bay. I'm waiting for an excellent butler to help me seek out a suitable house and servants. After handing over a £3 deposit, he politely drank another sip of black tea and got up to bid farewell. Balin sent him all the way out of the door and watched him board the carriage. Mr. Dantes also seems to be a tycoon. Compared to that, his bearing and gentlemanliness are even more charming. Balin stood in her spot as she casually thought. On the carriage, Klein half closed his eyes as he leaned against the wall, and he couldn't help but calculate the subsequent expenditures awaiting him. The butler will cost around £120. Taking into account the average cost, a valet will cost £35, a chef £30, a gardener £25, a carriage driver £25, a nursery governess £20, 3 ordinary ladies' maid £15, and 3 maidservants £10. This way, just the servants alone would cost £330 a year. It's equivalent to £6.7 solely a week. This already exceeds my salary back in Tingen. Furthermore, I'll need to have a carriage which costs about £100. I need a garden and house, and the weekly rental fee is about £2. With all the food, clothes, and charcoal expenditure for all these people, the overall cost is ridiculous. Is this the life of a tycoon? Klein suddenly felt a little regret over choosing such a persona. He exhaled as he tried hard to ignore the matter. He took a carriage to Phelps Street in Northborough. There was a pure black cathedral here, with a clock tower on each side, producing a symmetrical beauty. This was none other than the headquarters of the Backlund Diocese of the Church of the Evernight Goddess, St. Samuel Cathedral. Klein adjusted the handkerchief on his left pocket, held a gold-inlaid cane, and strode into the cathedral and walked down the quiet aisle. Under the sunlight which penetrated the colored glass panes, he came to the main prayer hall. It was very dark, making one's mood automatically turn peaceful. Klein casually found a spot, leaned his cane, and took off his hat. He then closed his eyes and prayed. Time passed, and after listening to the preaching, he slowly got up, walked to the altar, and bowed at the bishop with short, black hair. Then, he walked to the donation box by the side. Exhaling silently, Klein took out 2 £10 notes, 6 £5 notes and stuffed it inside. The bishop caught this sight through the corner of his eye as his expression couldn't help but turn soft. Typically, unless they specially solicited for donations or received donations from a deceased's will, the cathedral's donation box received tens of pounds at most. This meant that the person was a tycoon, a rich person. In the main prayer hall of St. Samuel Cathedral, the black-haired bishop retracted his gaze and stopped looking at the middle-aged gentleman in front of the donation box, nor did he have any intention of chatting with him. Here, before the holy altar, he represented the church, and he was under the goddess's sight. He couldn't show more warmth towards anyone because of their generous donations. However, he remembered the gentleman's good looks and mature, refined disposition. He planned on attempting to get to know him when the opportunity arose in the future. Seeing the final note slip into the donation box, Klein closed his eyes and turned to leave. When passing the preaching bishop, he deliberately glanced at the clergyman and smiled with a nod. The bishop returned with a warm smile as he tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. Klein wasn't in a hurry to make contact with the relevant personnel. He needed his actions to adhere to logic, and not to have any jarring actions that would incur suspicion. He silently and coolly turned to the side to give way to another devotee, and he made way down the aisle back to his seat. He then picked up his hat and cane before walking out of the cathedral. At that moment, with the preaching done, the devotees either went forward to the donation box to express their sincerity, or they got up to leave without feeling that there was anything wrong. After all, it wasn't compulsory. Even a devotee who passionately donated was unable to donate money every time. It usually depended on the family's exact situation, doing it once or twice every 1 to 2 weeks. At the level of a commoner, each donation was in the form of pennies, while middle-class devotees ranged from 3 to 5 solely. The wealthy and nobles used pounds, but they didn't exceed 100 pounds. This was under ordinary circumstances. During the Evernight Goddess's Holy Memorial Day every year, which was the Winter Gifts Day, the amount donated would increase several times. The commoners with a little bit more cash to spare would choose 2 to 3 solely, while the middle class donated around 5 pounds. As for the members of high society, they directly donated to the diocese bishop or church's charitable organizations, ranging from several hundred pounds to a few thousand pounds. Winter Gifts Day was the day in a year when the night was longest. It was believed to be the birthday of the Evernight Goddess. After leaving the cathedral, Klein stood at the square outside. He watched idly as pigeons flew up, circled around, and landed. He even bought some food from a nearby street hawker. He leisurely fed the pigeons, and he had no plans on flipping through the advertisements in the newspapers to find a suitable residence in Northborough since it was the butler's mission. An excellent butler that had resided in Backland for many years had ought to know the different nobles and tycoons, as well as the best middle-class individuals who could provide their masters with help. He would know which streets to live in and, from there, purposefully choose a residence. The interaction between neighbors was the first step for a newcomer to enter the relevant circles. Be it the Carlton Club where members of the Conservative Party gather, the Club of the Free of the New Party, or the various in-service and veteran clubs for the military, they also require a recommendation before any contact can be made. This is also the so-called club politics in the kingdom. Klein reined in his thoughts as he considered what he should do after he was done setting up the pigeon-feeding persona he created. After careful consideration, he discovered that there was really nothing that needed his immediate attention. This was because his plans were stuck on the surface. Hence, he planned on enjoying an expensive and sumptuous lunch. This was an action Dwayne Dantes ought to have, and it was also a result of Klein's own curiosity. In the months when he was in Backland, he didn't manage to muster the courage to head to the most famous restaurants in the big city to broaden his horizons. He kept choosing one of the 4, his own dining hall, the buffet cafeteria of the Quelag Club, the ordinary restaurants by the streets, and Lawyer Jurgen's dining hall. Otherwise, he would head to Eastborough and settle his breakfast and lunch in what seemed like a very oily coffee shop. Labori Restaurant. Their head chef is said to be from Earl Hall's family. He has provided tycoons, successful lawyers, high-ranking government officials with usually hard-to-come-by flavors. Earl Hall had apparently invested in this restaurant and holds quite a major stake in it. This restaurant mainly serves local Backland cuisine. It's very famous for its desserts, but its price is horrendous. Intis Renzo restaurant. It serves the most authentic Intis cuisine. Many of the specialty dishes use Roselle's name, claiming that it originated from the Emperor's Palace dishes. Besides, it's not like most of the restaurants of the same class where they only offer a few main dishes every day. It has a wide variety. Klein recalled the information of the top restaurants he had read from the papers and magazines, and he finally decided on trying out the Emperor's Palace dishes. He didn't stay any longer as he got on a horse carriage and headed for the Intis Renzo restaurant in Westborough. At the entrance, Klein handed his coat, hat, and cane to a red-vested waiter as he asked, "Are there still any available seats? I didn't make a reservation." "Yes, sir." The red-vested waiter didn't show any abnormal behavior as he humbly asked, "Sir, is this your first time here? Are you alone?" Klein nodded frankly and smiled. "Yes." "Then, may I have the honor of introducing you to some of our most unique dishes and fine wine that our restaurant has to offer?" As the waiter spoke, he led the guest in. "That's exactly what I need." Klein passed through the beautifully decorated door, and he saw walls that nearly reflected golden light. Instantly, he felt as though he was in a gold vault. Then, he noticed oil paintings hung on the walls, marble statues that were placed at suitable locations, as well as golden objects that were embedded or adorned in different spots. "Please watch your step," the attendant warned him as he led Klein to a spot by the window. Violin music played in the background of the restaurant. The waiter brought him a food menu and a wine menu as he flipped it open and introduced, "These are our most famous dishes: red braised taggia beef short ribs, black truffle porcini mushrooms, Intis-styled foie gras. I would like to point out that our foie gras comes directly from the Bonus farm in Champagne province in the Intis kingdom." As Klein listened to the waiter's introduction, he browsed through the menu written in ancient Faisac, as the prices caught his eyes. After introducing the main dishes, starters, and desserts, the waiter began explaining how the wines should be matched. "Finally," he said, "the champagne, red wine, and white wine we have all come from a famous brewery from Champagne province. We even have Ormer red wine from 1330. Its price is £126. If you wish to purchase it, you can take it along with you or store it with us, drinking a cup every time you come, £126. I can already hire an excellent butler with that." Klein smiled with great grace. "Your dishes and wine are excellent. It's really difficult to choose." The red-vested waiter gave a hospitable smile. "You can choose the chef's recommendations for the day. It will be an authentic and delicious Intis meal arranged by our main chef. There are 3 choices, £15, £10, and £8. I don't want any of them." Klein leaned back slightly as he smiled. "I'll have the £15 set meal." "All right." The red-vested waiter took away the menus, and he walked towards the kitchen. Klein drew a breath and slowly exhaled as he casually observed the area before him. Suddenly, he saw a familiar figure. It was a lady wearing an olive-green dress. She was tall, with an excellent figure. She wore a black, out-of-fashion bonnet, with a fishnet veil hanging down and concealing her face. As a faceless, Klein had a strong ability to discern the external characteristics of humans. He immediately identified the lady. Queen Mystic, Emperor Roselle's eldest daughter, Bernadette Gustave. He wasn't in a rush to look away as he naturally moved his gaze to the side. Bernadette didn't seem to notice anything abnormal as she disappeared around the stairwell. Why would she appear here? Right, this restaurant's specialty is Emperor Roselle's palace dishes. It's nothing like the Chinese cuisine I thought it would be. He probably doesn't know how to cook and at best, is able to describe the concept. There are stir-fried dishes here. Could the owner behind the scenes actually be her? Why is she here in Backland instead of floating out at sea? Hasn't she found hero bandit Black Emperor? Klein sat down with a calm expression as questions arose in his mind. Meanwhile, on the streets, a carriage was driving towards the Intis Renzo restaurant. Sitting in the carriage was Aaron Series' family. This famous surgeon was a member of the Quelag Club, a good friend of Sherlock Moriarty. He had once sought out the detective to handle Will Ossepton's matter. Ever since his wife became pregnant, he found his luck had become rather good. His business was improving by the day, and his income was rising by the month. He recently successfully completed Baron Sindra's surgery, and he received the commendation of this newly promoted noble. He was invited to the Srenzo restaurant to have lunch with him. It's said that the ice cream is pretty good, Aaron smiled as he said to his wife. His wife was a black-haired beauty, and she was already obviously pregnant. She smiled demurely and said, "I'm more looking forward to Emperor Rosel's palace dishes." Aaron tersely acknowledged as he looked out the window. "We're almost there." Just as he said that, his wife held her tummy and frowned. "It hurts a little." Aaron, who wasn't a first-time father, immediately checked on her and didn't discover any problems, but his wife was feeling greater discomfort. The child in her womb seemed to be pulling a tantrum. I think I won't go over there. I wish to return home to rest," Aaron's wife suggested. Aaron thought for a while and said, "I'll accompany you home." He immediately ordered his valet, "Get down here and head to the restaurant to apologize to Baron Sindras on my behalf." After the carriage began its return, the discomfort that Aaron's wife suffered was relieved. By the time she walked through the doorstep, everything was normal. She pointed at her tummy, exasperated. "It appears like he doesn't want to eat ice cream." Achoo! In the Intis Renzo restaurant, Klein, who hadn't spared any dish, felt the pinch but began enjoying his ice cream in satisfaction. Midway, he found his nose itchy as he sneezed into a piece of tissue paper he pulled out. Westboro. In a dark house. Furs, who had already advanced to astrologer, participated in all kinds of beyonder gatherings, in search of the possibility to earn money. She owed Zio 220 pounds, and she was even suspected by her good friend of being involved in illegal gambling. "I can't even afford to buy my essential crystal ball." As her thoughts wandered, Furs suddenly heard a member at the gathering say, "I wish to sell a moon puppet." Chapter 740, Self-Recommendation Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Moon Puppet. Furza's heart palpitated as she refocused and looked at the gathering participant who had just spoken. The man in a black iron mask had already taken out a small puppet and showed it to everyone. "I have a friend who discovered a series of graves deep in the southern continent's Paz Valley. This puppet was stuck in the deceased's right eye socket." Furs observed the puppet seriously just like the other gathering participants. She discovered that it was slender, and its entire body resembled a tiny wooden piece that had been engraved with crescent-like eyes and a mouth. Embedded in it were dried grass and flowers. "Doesn't look like anything special," Furs mumbled inwardly. Her spiritual perception didn't sense anything as her pen-wielding hand continued hovering over a bronze-green notebook. The man in the iron mask continued the introduction. "My friend and I are unable to determine what use this puppet has, and we can only suspect that it's not simple. It might also hide quite a secret." 60 pounds. For just 60 pounds, you can have it. This price is very fair. Even if it has nothing to do with mysticism, it's not a bad antique worth 40 to 50 pounds. That is to say you'll be spending 10 pounds to have a chance of a pleasant surprise. To you, this is a small sum of money. A very tempting explanation. This gentleman is likely a successful salesman. However, I don't even have 10 pounds. As Furs engaged in a self-deprecating laugh, she didn't believe that anyone would buy the so-called moon puppet of unknown origins and usage. Just as she had that thought, she heard a female voice which was deliberately suppressed. 50 pounds. Is she too rich, or is she willing to try her luck? Furs subconsciously turned her head to look at the speaking person, only to see the lady wearing a hooded long robe. Her face was hidden in the shadows. At that moment, the owner of the moon puppet laughed. "I'll be more inclined to keep it for myself. Perhaps, there might come a time when I discover what's so special about it." As he spoke, he realized that no one was offering a better price. He immediately said, "Of course, as a gentleman, I'll satisfy your wish since you have expressed your desire and have given a reasonable price." "Deal," the hooded woman replied with a deep voice. Soon, the gathering's attendant helped them complete the transaction. Furs noticed that the lady's hand was trembling slightly after she received the moon puppet. She places great importance on the item. She might actually know what's so special about the puppet. Moon puppet. Moon. From the southern continent. Furs suddenly made connections and recalled the few primordial moon believers who Mr. Moon was searching for. She began having a suspicion that the hooded lady was one of them, or that she had a connection with them. Of course, she had zero evidence. She didn't even have much of a compelling reason to have such a guess. Phew. Furs silently exhaled as she decided to find a way to verify her theory. She casually moved the hard-covered notebook in her hand, making a yellowish-brown goatskin appear. On the piece of paper were all kinds of patterns that formed an ancient, mysterious picture of unknown intent. This was one of the pages of Lamino's travels, and it recorded a particular beyonder power. It wasn't a recorded power which Furs had gathered herself, but one of the 5 original pages when she received it. Furs looked up, and she pretended to observe the transactions of the others while fully taking in the hooded lady's situation. She discovered that there was a mosquito with dark brown spots on a nearby wall and unknown worms that were slowly squirming on the ground. Furs's finger naturally slid across the yellowish-brown goatskin's pattern as a complicated symbol quickly formed in her mind. Silently and without showing any odd signs, she felt that she had understood the brown pattern, as her thoughts connected with the other parties. The brown-spotted mosquito flew at a low height. It circled beneath the hooded lady and carefully clung to her front. The mosquito's vision was different from a human's since an incomprehensible scene appeared in Furs's mind. But it soon disintegrated and reformed into a rather normal scene. The hooded lady had a rather curved outline with dark skin. Her brows were thin and the corners of her mouth drooped significantly. Furs immediately recognized her. She was none other than the primordial moon believer, Windsor Bearing, who Mr. Moon was searching for. An effective clue is worth £100, and directly finding her means £500. Furs recalled the reward as she immediately became flustered. Her first reaction was to drive the mosquito to bite Windsor Bearing and suck her blood. That way, she could later use astromancy to directly lock onto her location. However, she gave up the idea after struggling for a moment. That was extremely taboo in a Beyonder gathering. If she were discovered, she would definitely be attacked by all the participants of the gathering. And the host of the gathering often had significant strength. Going too overboard made it easily detectable. I'll just get the £100. If there's another chance, I'll consider how to lock onto her directly. I have to leave this gathering early and smear my blood over Lamino's travels to prevent myself from getting lost. That would be dangerous. Furs repressed her disappointment as she made her final decision. In fact, her actions were already out of line, hence, she didn't wish to stay another second longer. Hillston Borough, inside a high-class hotel. Klein stood behind an oriel window as he silently took in the crimson moon and thin clouds in the sky. Some time later, he combed the white hair around his temples and reached out to draw the curtains. Then, he went through the hassle of moving the radio transceiver back to the real world and spent the time airing out most of its smell. This time, he only waited about 10 seconds when he felt the room turn dark and eerie. He heard the radio transceiver begin to producing clicking sounds. Klein approached and saw a piece of illusory paper spew out. On the paper were words composed of Loanese, "Great Master, please look right. Right." Klein turned his head in amusement and curiosity to his side. He saw a full-body mirror, which had already turned dark, as though it was smeared with a layer of ink. Just as a thought flashed in his mind, the full-body mirror lit up. Illusory fireworks began shooting inside the mirror as it burst and scattered down in a beautiful and dazzling display. Meanwhile, the full-body mirror produced a line of golden Loanese words. "Welcome back, great master." At that moment, although Rhodes didn't produce any sound, Klein had the baffling feeling that it was hysterically shouting. As the fireworks came to an end, the golden text distorted and formed a new line of text. "Great master, your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, wishes to ask you how I might be of service to you." Klein was already very accustomed to this as he said in a practiced manner, "Answer my questions." The golden line of text reformed again. "Thank you for your answer. You may ask." Prepared, Klein said, "Where did the evil spirit in William Street go to?" The full-body mirror's golden text froze for a few seconds before they slowly disappeared. As for the blooming fireworks in the background, they first blurred before a new scene became clear. It was that of an abandoned chapel where withered vines crawled over its walls, and grey stones were strewn everywhere. Klein found it rather familiar. It was where he and Sharon had once conversed with the evil spirit. The scene drew close as Klein saw that in a corner of the collapsed chapel was a tiny pit that wasn't too deep. There were clear signs of it being dug up with one's fingers. Miss Magician mentioned it before. As Klein's thoughts surfaced, the scene produced a cold voice that hid a smile. "It's a pleasure working with you." As those words came out of the soil, the scene immediately turned distorted like a water surface being stirred before the scene completely shattered. "Pleasure working with you." Who did the evil spirit speak to? To make an angel from the hunter pathway use such a tone, the person opposite it mustn't be someone of a lower level. That person might even be an angel. However, why would he use his hands to dig? He should have a much easier method that didn't waste that much time. The angel is also restricted in a certain sense. Just like that grandpa in Leonard's body? Right, Leonard was in Backlund back then. This is a clue, but there are other possibilities. Something at the level of an angel doesn't equate to being an angel. The evil spirit controlled Baronet Pound to contact someone. From the looks of it, the Intis and Faceac spies were just a smokescreen that was deliberately set up by the evil spirit. As expected of a conspirer. Thoughts ran through Klein's mind as he said to Rhodes, "Second question, I have 3 butlers to choose from. Who do you think is the most suitable?" Golden Loanese words appeared one after another. "If you choose Reback and Walter, there might be an additional development. Asnia is the most professional, but he's also the most ordinary. The 2 who were formerly under the service of Duke Negan and Viscount Conrad do allow for additional development." Klein nodded in thought. "It's your turn to ask." At this moment, a bunch of golden text appeared. "Great master, what do you make of me being your butler? As long as you bring me out of the Church of Steam, I can become the best butler in the world." Klein hesitated for a second as he replied, mincing his words, "It's not suitable at the moment." The golden text in the full-body mirror darkened instantly before it lit up again, reforming the words, "All right. Your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, will patiently await the day." Immediately following that, the full-body mirror produced a complicated picture with some footnotes. This is a rune formed with the corresponding symbols and magical labels. "Great master, as long as you are in Backlund, writing it on some paper is equivalent to summoning me. A mixture of secrecy and mystery prying symbols." Klein identified the rune and said, "Okay.